Good day to everyone. I'm Sharan and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of Beroe, I would like to welcome you all for today's webinar from Beroe Insights. So, in today's webinar, we will have our speakers discuss and highlight how supplier diversity could support a potential business opportunity for us. So before we move ahead with the presentation, I have some general set of instruction as always. Please note all the attendees will be placed on mute, and during the course of the presentation, if you would like to post a question, you will find a box on the right hand side which you see it's indicated in red in the slide that you see. I request you to type your question and hit the send button, and as the presentation progresses, I will ensure to take down the high frequency question and post it to the presenter at the end of the session. If you're experiencing any connection issues, I request you to close the window, go back to the link that was sent to you via the email, and I would request you to log in using that link again. If there are further problems, I request you to please email Puneet at puneet.ramal@beroe-inc.com, which you will find in the email that was sent to you, or which is also reflecting in the screen right now. So, moving on, let me quickly introduce the speaker and our expert panelist for today's webinar. Firstly, I would like to welcome our expert who's there on today's webinar, Alice Sinberg. Thanks for joining us today. She's an expert in actionable approaches to responsible procurement. Alice specializes in helping companies around the world develop and integrate an actionable approach to responsible procurement. Our speaker for today, Meenakshi, is an expert in research biology at Beroe. Her category expertise helps her in addressing client-specific market and procurement intelligence queries for a lot of our clients. One of her articles on discovery toxicology services was published in the recent past in the Pharmaceutical Industry magazine feature of 2013. And also she has written and published several thought leadership papers in leading pharmaceutical industry journals and magazines. So I would pass it on to our speakers for today, Alice and Meenakshi. Over to you.
Thank you, Sharan. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, where we will discuss supplier diversity in pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical industry of late is reeling under pressure from drying pipelines to revenue loss from patent cliffs. There is a significant increase in the number of mergers and acquisitions, in joint ventures, and in licensing. Similarly, we do notice a rise in external engagements and outsourcing activities. In this scenario, cost effectiveness is of paramount importance, and procurement today is in forefront driving these cost effectiveness in external collaborations. Let me share an interesting trend that I noticed in recent past. Several large pharma companies have in fact increased their engagements with specialized or niche service providers, specialized CROs. And when I mean specialized or niche service providers, I refer to one such class of service providers who are different. They are called diverse service providers. So, the objective of today's webinar is to understand who diverse suppliers are. Why is there a need to engage with them? What are the potential benefits one can derive out of engaging with these suppliers, and how and where indeed to engage with them? So, during today's webinar, we will explore who are diverse suppliers, why should pharma consider engaging with diverse suppliers, at what level can pharma engage with diverse suppliers, which geographies, what spend categories, and finally, we will identify a roadmap for the shift to diverse suppliers. So, who indeed are diverse suppliers? Am I referring to diversified suppliers, suppliers with presence in multiple geographies? No, I'm talking about diverse suppliers, those business enterprises that are at least 51% owned, controlled, and managed by diversity groups. Who are these diversity groups? Well, diversity groups include minorities, LGBT community, women, veterans, physically challenged individuals, and small business entities. For example, in USA, minority groups include African Americans, Asians, Hispanic, Native Americans, etc. Whereas in Australia, it includes Aboriginal population as well. So, now we know who diverse suppliers are. Let us take a look at what benefits can be derived by engaging with them. Why should pharma consider engaging with diverse suppliers? The first reason is corporate social responsibility. Let me quote a recent study. This was conducted by Institute of Supply Chain Management, and they tried to find out what are the reasons behind establishment of supply diversity programs. Most respondents, I quote, 70% indeed responded saying, it is the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. Well, social responsibilities across the globe is driving procurement to engage with diverse suppliers. And this is very evident in countries wherein there are no regulatory requirements to engage with them. And of late, large pharma have a target to source a percentage of their business from diverse suppliers. And during my discussions with industry experts, both at the buying and the supplier end, I realized that pharma industry on an average spends 15 to 20% of their externalized spend with diverse suppliers. Let us look at the next biggest motivation to engage with diverse suppliers. It is tax benefits, monetary benefits. The tax benefits that can be achieved with these engagements range from a mere 10% up to 40%. Let me illustrate a case scenario here. France, one of European Union Big Five countries. France is renowned worldwide for innovation and R&D. However, France is also known for higher wage, higher staffing rates. So, if you are a pharma sponsor and you wish to procure R&D services from France and you choose to go with a small innovative business, well, you can save up to 35% in tax credits. So, tax credits, tax benefits, corporate social responsibility. Well, these are common to all industries. It can be applied to automobiles, to information technology. The next reason why a pharma should consider engaging with diverse suppliers is very specific. It is very specific indeed to pharmaceutical R&D. That is, recruitment of minority populations. Clinical trials, as such, are rites of passage for any new drug. Herein, the new drug is investigated in patients or volunteers to determine how effective they are in treating a disease. Therefore, recruitment and retention of patients or volunteers is very crucial in drug development. Let me give you a few statistics, a few numbers to ponder upon. African Americans constitute up to 12% of total US population. Hispanics account for 16%. But their participation in clinical trials are just 4% and 1% respectively. That is, among 100 clinical trial participants, only 4 are of African American origin and just 1 is of Hispanic origin. Let us look at another set of statistics. This was by a study conducted by University of California, and what they found was a Puerto Rican or a Mexican American is twice more prone to diabetes than Caucasians. But the participation in clinical trials, in diabetes clinical trials, less than 4%. Such disparity. Why don't these ethnic groups participate in clinical trials that can possibly find a cure to the disease? Well, reasons are many, but the most recurrent reasons are lack of awareness. Most feel that they might be treated as human guinea pigs, lack of cultural understanding, and most important of them all, lack of trust. Mistrust of scientific investigators and of academic institutes. This is the single major barrier that prevents many minority communities from participating in clinical trials. How to build trust? Trust can't be built in a day. However, engagement with a diverse supplier from one of these communities who are a part of the patient populations, this often helps because this helps in building better relationships, and that results in higher patient recruitment and retention, which in turn brings in better therapy tailored for a particular target. So, corporate social responsibility, tax benefits, recruitment of minority populations, better therapies, better tailored to their target groups. Alice, at this point, would you like to share some insights on why procurement should consider diverse suppliers?
Yes, of course. To my point of view, when large organizations make the conscious and active decision to diversify their supply chain, there are normally many positive payoffs. Companies that have implemented supply diversity programs say that payoff has come in the form of stronger relationships with their supply base, new business opportunities, and a more agile supply chain. It's also about spreading the supply risk. Reduction of risk spreading can be achieved by widening the pool of potential suppliers. So if procurers are to be sure that they are accessing the widest possible pool of potential suppliers, they need to ensure that information about their procurement opportunities is spread through more varied routes than they might have relied on previously in order to reach a diverse applicant pool. It's also important that large purchasing organizations respond to the changing external environment and maintain the best possible strategic fit with it. So they need to produce products and services that are appropriate to an increasingly diverse marketplace and be able to find the best suppliers from an increasingly diverse candidate pool. Supply diversity can help them achieve all this.
Sure, Alice. So, from what we have discussed, financial gain, accessing innovation, doing good to the society, ability to develop tailored therapies to a target population, stronger supplier relationships, more agile supply chain, spreading of supply chain risk. Well, for all these reasons, diversity spend is increasing today. But what is the flip side of engaging with diverse suppliers? Well, there are a few challenges in engagement with diverse suppliers, and today we will focus on 4 such challenges. I'll focus on 2 of these challenges and Alice will discuss the rest. The first challenge that I would like to focus upon is what the procurement faces. And this is one of the greatest challenges indeed. That is, finding a diverse supplier with the capacities and the capabilities to meet the requirement. Let me illustrate this particular challenge with an example. Let us assume there is a clinical trial, and the clinical trial is scheduled to take place in USA and couple of countries in Europe. Now, you are asked to engage a diverse patient recruitment organization, and this specialist must have presence in both the geographies. The specialist must have presence in both US and in the countries in Europe. You scan the market, you identify diverse suppliers, but you have come up with a list of potential diverse suppliers, but they have presence in one location or the other. What will you do? Well, if this requirement of yours is quite urgent, look at diverse suppliers that have network partnerships in other geographies. A diverse patient recruitment supplier who is based in US, say, has a network partner in Europe, then together they can bid for this contract and can cater to a service that was previously not possible alone. So network partnership helps. And through my research, I have observed that today, diverse suppliers are actively networking among themselves, and this is often facilitated by third parties like non-profit entities, certifying bodies, etc. Further, most importantly, large pharma is showing interest in engaging with them. Let us consider another scenario. Say, instead of an urgent requirement, you need this patient recruitment firm by the end of next year. Then scale up, help your diverse supplier who has presence in one geography, invest with them, help them scale up. Thus, challenges in terms of scope and scale can be mitigated through proactive network partnerships among diverse suppliers, and at times, as a buyer, you can invest in your diverse supplier and help them scale up. Let me take you to the next challenge. Quality of services. Very often, procurement faces this challenge. Quality of services not up to the mark. In most cases, quality issues result from lack of good governance structure, less visibility in supply chain, etc. Let me illustrate a real-time case scenario here. 10 years ago, a large pharma engaged with a diverse supplier for IT-related services. At that time, the supplier was facing issues in terms of quality, in terms of sustainability, and limited service capability. In fact, more than 60% of their business came from one client. However, the large pharma invested with their diverse supplier. They trained, mentored, even gave financial aid. And today, this diverse supplier has streamlined service offering, has looked into their supply chain strategically, focusing on their quality offerings, and has multiple Fortune 1000 clients. Today, this diverse supplier has diversified its service offerings and, most importantly, has a better visibility in its supply chain. Therefore, investing with diverse supplier, mentoring them, training them, helping them develop better governance structures, share best practices, case studies on how to mitigate risk. Well, these practices often get better results, and most importantly, as a buyer, you will be assured of the quality of service and be free of risk that might arise from stability of your supply. And in fact, several large pharma today have active diverse supplier mentoring and training programs. Now, Alice will share two other prevalent challenges that are faced by procurement. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you. As Meenakshi said, the use of diverse suppliers usually means changing the way you procure. So diverse suppliers are, as a rule, smaller, carry lower levels of insurance, may not have mature business policies and procedures, and may be put off if you ask them to participate in a complex tendering process. What I see is that the main barriers to engaging with diverse suppliers is the lack of knowledge and information. It could be the understanding of which companies exist and how you best contact them and include them in your business. For diverse suppliers, it is typically a barrier that they are not having access to the information about what is being bought. It's also a challenge for them, or for many diverse suppliers, to understand how to demonstrate compliance or how to market their services or competence in the procurement process. Hence, they'll never have the chance to fully participate in the process. So make sure your welcoming message is clear and that you are actually open to new suppliers. It's also important to decide which types of suppliers that are to be considered diverse suppliers and how to measure it. While this might seem like a no-brainer, it's actually very important to think through the options at the very beginning. Not recognizing one supplier group as diverse suppliers can cause problems later. Recognizing diverse supplier groups later can negatively impact your year-over-year comparison of metrics. There's an old saying, what gets measured gets done. So to ensure actual use of diverse suppliers, you need an easy way to determine how much your organization is spending with them. I acknowledge that there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work to be done in order to accomplish this, such as revising the supplier registration process and update current supplier information. For your inspiration, I know that there's a market leader in chemical who has recently held dialogue meetings in China with potential suppliers just to show openness and that they're welcome to contribute with the technologies they have. Acknowledging that suppliers are important in order to stay competitive is key to success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. So, to summarize, be it challenges arising from quality, governance, decision-making, or even revising the registration process, well, most of these challenges, the mitigation strategies include better communication, networking, sharing of knowledge in process development, sharing of best practices, as well as experiences. This mutual sharing of information can usher in better diverse supplier engagement. So, at what level can pharma firms engage with diverse suppliers? Well, diverse groups are present and are recognized globally. However, there are a few countries that move beyond recognition to actually developing policies and legislations to promote them. As we are all aware of policies in USA towards diverse suppliers, let us look at other states, what they offer through their legislations to support diversity groups. Here, I would like to focus on two countries. First, Australia and Canada. Both Australia and Canada have legislative policies that promote minority groups and women-owned enterprises. The minority groups also include Aboriginal population. Europe through Rome Act believes in equality to all. However, in particular to R&D services, they have innovative R&D tax credits that are offered to small innovative business, mid-sized innovative business. And as we had earlier discussed, France provisions a 30% with an additional 5% of R&D tax credits. Hence, pharma firms in US, Canada, Australia that operate in highly penetrated spend pools can leverage the availability of diverse suppliers. So now we know what countries to look for diverse suppliers. Let us see what categories to consider. Among the 100+ service providers that I've identified across the globe, around 20% are associated with clinical trial management services, 15% with clinical data management services, and around 12% each for clinical staffing services and regulatory audit services. Hence, Pharmaceutical can engage with diverse suppliers for clinical trial management, data management services, staffing services, and they can also look at other spend categories like IRB services, biostatistics, drug safety and PV services, etc. Let me take a pause here and summarize the discussion so far. So far, we have discussed who diverse suppliers are, what are the benefits in engaging with these diverse suppliers, what are the challenges, how to mitigate them. We have also looked at what geographies and which spend categories that pharma buyers can procure from diverse suppliers. Now, let us try and identify a roadmap for the shift to diverse suppliers. There are many routes, there are many ways to access diverse suppliers. Today we will discuss a few prominent ways to access diverse suppliers. I will discuss with you today 3 practices. First, sponsor database. Second, independent sourcing consultancies. Third, other prevalent networking practices. First, sponsor database. A large pharma sponsor can create their own database, invite suppliers to register in the database, and the suppliers would be required to furnish their certifications by third parties that certify that they are diverse suppliers, along with their service capabilities and capacities. These entries would then be evaluated and added to the procurement department supplier repository. And here it would be available as and when the need arises. Next, independent sourcing consultant. Here, the process of creation and maintenance of the database is carried out by a third party, an independent sourcing consultant. And the sponsor often is required to pay an annual fee to access the database. Here I would like to delve a little deeper. Well, there are 2 types of sourcing consultancies. The first type of sourcing consultancy, they just confirm the diversity status of registered companies. That means they just ensure that the registered companies are indeed diverse suppliers. Hence, the pharma sponsor is required to carry out evaluations regarding service capabilities, capacities, financial stability, etc. The next type, the second type of independent sourcing consultancies, well, they carry out end-to-end services. That is, they create the database, they make sure that the registered members, the registered suppliers are indeed diverse suppliers, and they also carry out auditing and benchmarking services. And the third type is what we call the other prevalent practices. Well, these are networking opportunities such as conferences, events, seminars, workshops. These community meetings are often organized by diversity organizations, non-for-profits, and even certifying agencies. These help in establishing active networks between sponsors and service providers, as well as among service providers. These networking events, they provide a platform to exchange ideas, to exchange best practices, address concerns, challenges that may arise in engagements with diverse suppliers. Now, I request Alice to share some innovative practices that she has encountered. Alice, if you could take over.
Yes. As you may see now on the screen, I've added a couple of examples or ideas to how you can make supply diversity more actionable. I mean, I have hundreds and thousands of ideas to how you can make it more actionable. But since time is limited, I've just mentioned a few. But there's one thing that I'd like to add. That is that if you want a strategic approach to supplier diversity, then there are 5 things that I think you should consider. The first one is start by obtaining the strategic overview. Before you plunge into the actual doing of supply diversity, it's well worth spending some time thinking about your organization's vision for supplier diversity. what would you actually like to achieve? And make sure that your strategic approach to supplier diversity links with your company's mission, objectives, and business strategy. The second thing is create a supplier diversity policy. Make sure that you create a policy which draws on the business case and links with the organization's mission, objectives, and strategy. The third thing that I recommend you to do is review your procurement policies, procedures, and practices. And the fourth thing, make opportunities accessible. As I mentioned earlier, make your business welcoming and make it open to new potential suppliers. And the fifth thing is, of course, start out by monitoring your performance. For instance, you could measure the amount you spend each year with diverse suppliers. You could measure on the percentage of increase on the previous year's spend. Yes. You could also look at the number of new suppliers and the number of diverse suppliers. That are 5 concrete things which I think you could do in order to make your approach more actionable and strategic. You can read more about the strategic approach in one of my ebooks, which you can download from my webpage. It's called Supply Diversity in Europe. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. So the key to better access to diverse suppliers lies in networking and in willingness to invest with them, financially as well as sharing knowledge. So the next question arises, how are diverse suppliers engaged? How to engage diverse suppliers? Suppliers can be engaged as Tier 1 diverse suppliers, where the buyer directly procures and engages with the supplier for provision of services. As we discussed earlier, when a large pharma had engaged with a diverse supplier for IT-related services. Diversity suppliers can also be subcontractors for non-diverse Tier 1 suppliers. In this case, the diverse supplier becomes Tier 2 supplier to the buyer. So, how does the benefit trickle down to large pharma? Well, the reporting can be done in 2 ways. Let us look at a Tier 1 engagement. Well, in a Tier 1 engagement, the large pharma must track the spend with diverse supplier, very straightforward indeed. However, in Tier 2 reporting, there is a little complication as it involves Tier 1 supplier engagement, and the Tier 1 supplier needs to report the spend with the subcontractors. So what happens here is that the Tier 1 supplier must identify all the spend with all its Tier 2 diverse suppliers and report it to the pharma sponsor. And the pharma sponsor is required to consolidate all the Tier 1 data and report it as Tier 2 spend. Of late, what I have observed is that large pharma are increasing their emphasis in Tier 2 engagements. Tier 2 engagements with diverse suppliers is in fact becoming a part of most master service contracts. Recently, a large pharma raised the bar for their Tier 1 suppliers. They in fact challenged their Tier 1 suppliers to increase Tier 2 spend with diverse suppliers, of course, by 10%. So, where to engage with diverse suppliers? Where to engage with them as Tier 1? Where to engage with them as Tier 2? Look at the outsourcing penetration rate. Look at the maturity of spend categories. Then look at the number of suppliers you engage with. This helps in identifying a roadmap to engage, how to engage with diverse suppliers, to go with Tier 1 type of engagement or to go with Tier 2 type of engagement. Let us look at a spend category. Let us take central laboratory services. Central laboratory services is 100% outsourced. It's a completely outsourced function in pharmaceutical R&D. In this scenario, you can focus on Tier 2 engagements with diverse suppliers. Similar categories would be clinical trial management services, data management services, as these services are highly outsourced and they are outsourced to 2 or 3 suppliers. Hence, here Tier 1 diverse supplier engagement is not feasible. But Tier 2, yes. Now let us look at another spend category which is totally different from these categories that we have discussed, non-clinical services or say discovery biology services. Both these spend categories are very less outsourced. The outsourcing penetration is around 20 to 25%. Now in this case, let us look at the second parameter. Let us look at the number of suppliers engaged, 10 to 50. Here, Tier 1 engagements are possible, Tier 2 engagements are also possible. But Tier 2 engagements get a little complicated. As you would remember, we had previously discussed, the spend reporting often gets in more complexities. Imagine having 15 Tier 1 suppliers, and these 15 Tier 1 suppliers are in turn engaging with 5 diverse suppliers each. So, spend reporting involves 15 Tier 1 suppliers plus 75 Tier 2 suppliers. And this gets further complicated when the Tier 1 supplier does not track the Tier 2 spend directly. So, let me summarize here. Tier 2 diverse supplier engagements offer strategic opportunity for large pharma in spend categories that are highly outsourced. They are heavily externalized, but to a few strategic partners, such as central lab services, clinical data management services, while Tier 1 type of engagements with diverse supplier are preferred in services where multiple service partners are engaged, where the number of suppliers ranges from 10 to 50. So, today we have discussed who diverse suppliers are, what are the benefits in engaging with them, what are the challenges, how to mitigate these challenges. We also identified in what geographies for which spend areas can a large pharma engage with diverse suppliers. Finally, we identified a roadmap to access these diverse suppliers and engage with them. Thank you for your time. Do let us know if you have any queries.
Thank you, Meenakshi. I think that was a very insightful presentation. Alice, thanks for sharing your comments where it was required. This comes to the end of the presentation, but we have a couple of questions that's come up during the course of the presentation, which I'll just post it to you, Meenakshi. One question that we had was regarding the Tier 2 spend that we were discussing. So what are the areas in R&D where Tier 2 spend tracking will be critical? So could you just throw some light into that, please, Meenakshi?
Sure, Sharon. Well, categories where the spend has been consolidated, it has been limited, where you have a strategic kind of partnership with 2 or 3 vendors. Here is where Tier 2 engagements will be very important. They have a very large role to play. And further, there are some other categories that have big spend areas like central lab, like clinical trial management, lab equipment and services. These spend areas would be the focus points for Tier 2 engagements and Tier 2 spend tracking.
Thank you, Meenakshi. I think that gives a good insight as to what are the areas that one could look at in terms of R&D. The next question that we have is in terms of the products and services. The question is like, could you name any product or services that provide opportunities to engage with the diverse suppliers?
Well, that's an interesting question indeed. From the top of my mind, there are 2 categories that have the potential to be engaged as diverse suppliers. The first category that comes to me is staffing or resourcing. This is a crucial part in any clinical trial or the whole of pharmaceutical R&D, and it is a niche market. but there are quite some good, there is an availability of good and big diverse suppliers in this category. Some women-owned and minority-owned enterprises are out there. And the second category would be patient recruitment, communication agencies. Even here, as we had discussed during the course of presentation, a minority patient recruitment firm can make a big difference in terms of minority patient recruitment and retention rates. And further, the split of this business with some top agencies, they can be like 50% CRO engagement, 50% pharma engagement. So, well, and further, this means that there is a lot of subcontracting here. Hence, you can directly go to the tier 2 supplier and engage with them as a tier 1 supplier.
Thank you for that insight. So we have one last question, and I think that's a very interesting question that's come from one of our audience. This is in regards to what are best-in-class companies actually doing? I think, yeah, they must be front-runners in terms of diversity procurement, but could you throw some light into that, Meenakshi?
Well, yeah, Sharon, and you have rightly noted that the best-in-class companies are always the leaders. They are leaders in tracking, in monitoring both tier 1 and tier 2 spends. And most importantly, they have developed a lot of tools. From my interactions with industry experts, both buyer and at supplier, and I have realized that there are companies who are leaders in developing these tools and metrics that help them monitor their tier 1 spend and their tier 2 spend. And this is not a reactive measure. In fact, most of these companies are quite proactive in this, and they don't wait for a compliance to drive them to engage or a diverse supplier either on tier 1 or tier 2 basis. Let me give an example. Recently in India, we had our national elections, and which got concluded, and affirmative action for disadvantaged groups in private sector, well, this was a major focus area, and this is something which we are seeing in other emerging markets as well in future. So what I would expect a best-in-class company to do would be to reach out to minority groups, women-owned enterprises, and other disadvantaged groups in emerging markets, such as, say, in India and some other emerging countries here. And in this way, they would be ahead of their peers and stay ahead in the curve. I hope that answers your query.
Yeah, thanks for that, Meenakshi. I think it overall, it gives a good insight as to how supplier diversity is going to be very prevalent moving on, and how it is going to be a potential opportunity for a lot of businesses to strategize on how they're going to take this forward, especially while interacting with suppliers and working with them on day-to-day basis. Thank you, Meenakshi. So this wraps up the presentation for today. Thank you, Alice. Thanks for being part of today's webinar with us. It was great having you in the panel. Thank you, audience. It was great to have you in today's webinar. Until we meet again next time, we sign off. Bye and have a great day.